The plant is not a substance. It is a frequency. And what you feel is not what it gives you, but what it awakens in you. Unknown Hermetic saying. You've been taught to ask the wrong questions. What strain should I try? How much should I take? Will it make me feel better? But cannabis doesn't respond to questions like that. She responds to frequency. Not what you want, but who you are when you meet her. Because cannabis isn't a high. It's a mirror. It doesn't give you new feelings. It amplifies the ones you've been trying to ignore. What you feel under its influence isn't coming from the plant. It's coming from you, reflected with a precision that can either feel like medicine or madness. The mistake is thinking the plant holds the power. That if you get the dosage right, the playlist right, the mood just right, she'll take you somewhere safe. But cannabis doesn't take you. She reveals you. And if what she reveals is uncomfortable, the anxiety, the noise, the spiral, that's not failure. That's the feedback you've been avoiding. Most people want cannabis to make them feel good. Few are ready to let it show them the truth. But that's what it was always meant to do. Not to soothe, but to strip. To dissolve the filters you use to survive and show you what's underneath. In ancient traditions, this was known. Cannabis wasn't recreational, it was initiatory. Portal, not a pastime. Used by those who were prepared to meet themselves without filters. In silence. In presence. In honesty. But today we use it to mute, not to meet. We light up, scroll endlessly, float in digital sedation. We forget that cannabis in sacred hands was a threshold. And thresholds aren't always gentle. They test. So when you inhale and feel discomfort rise, don't blame the plant. Ask yourself, what have I been hiding? What have I refused to feel sober? What part of me is finally speaking now that I've quieted the world? Because cannabis doesn't malfunction. She responds. And her response is a mirror, not a remedy. And if you're ready, truly ready, to face what that mirror reflects, then the journey can begin. But not with a puff. With presence. With reverence. With the willingness to meet your own truth. Not in bliss, but in clarity. Because this isn't about getting high. It's about getting honest. You don't awaken because you feel more. You awaken because you see more. And what cannabis shows you isn't some psychedelic vision. It's your own psyche turned inside out. Every fragment of longing. Every repressed ache. Every mental loop you thought you escaped. Laid bare. That's why the experience shifts. One day it's peace. The next it's panic. The plant isn't inconsistent. You are. She simply reflects your state, and censored. But instead of preparing ourselves, we project. We blame the strain, the environment, the dosage, anything but the reality that we stepped into a sacred mirror with muddy feet. That's not a mistake. It's a message. One that says, if you want clarity, clean your vessel first. In the old ways, there was no casual smoke. The inhale came after fasting, silence, cleansing, prayer. Not out of superstition, but out of recognition. Recognition that the mind must be stable before it expands, or what you touch will not be heaven. It will be the hell you haven't healed. And yet, the modern world doesn't care. We consume the plant like entertainment. We commodify what was once consecrated. And when the discomfort rises, we call it a bad trip. Not knowing it's the sacred refusing to be used like a product. So ask yourself, why do I reach for the plant? To feel good? Or to feel true? To amplify what's clear? Or to blur what's loud? Because the plant amplifies your question too. And she doesn't care about your vibe. She cares about your intention. She isn't here to save you. She's here to remind you that your body is already sacred, that your breath already knows the way, that your inner noise isn't a problem. It's a call. And the plant? She doesn't fix that call. She just turns up the volume until you finally listen. Long before she was sold in sleek jars and smoked on sidewalks, cannabis sat in the laps of mystics. Not as a habit, but as a spirit. Not recreational, not medicinal, initiatory. To enter her space meant stepping into a current of ancient memory, and the ancients knew. This was not something to take lightly. In India, she was sacred to Shiva, the destroyer of illusion. The chillum was not a pipe, it was a prayer. Smoking wasn't a hobby. It was a rite. To inhale meant to die to the false self. Not to feel better, but to become no one so that something real could finally move through. The sadhus didn't use cannabis to escape suffering. They used it to enter it fully, to dissolve the walls between them and the raw, unfiltered truth. In Taoist alchemy, cannabis was mixed with other herbs, timed to moon phases, held within breathing patterns and sexual transmutation. Not to get high, to refine the internal energy, to crystallize clarity, to touch the void. When done improperly, the plant scattered the qi, creating chaos. But when honored properly, it was a ladder to the subtle realms. Among Sufi mystics, hashish wasn't forbidden, but it was feared, because it resembled God too closely, the soft dissolve of separation, the sweet burn of annihilation. But even they warned, don't trust the feeling. Rumi said, what looks like freedom may be another cage. And that's the truth cannabis whispers when she's not drowned in dopamine. That transcendence is not sensation. It's surrender. Even the Rastafari, who today are most associated with ganja, never used it as casually as Western media suggests. The herb was smoked in reasoning sessions, group rituals where truth was sought through smoke, scripture, rhythm, and silence. The herb was never smoked for loneliness, only for connection, for remembering the divine embedded in each other. What these cultures understood and what we've forgotten is that cannabis is context-sensitive. Without ritual, it amplifies indulgence. Without containment, it becomes fog. But when the sacred frame is present, when the space is clean and the heart is sincere, the plant reveals her original face. She is not a substance. She is a frequency. And ancient eyes saw that frequency not as passive, but as alive, a spirit, presence, one that listens as much as she speaks, one that tests as much as she teaches, and one that never lies, but will reveal what you've been lying to yourself about. Modern culture cut her roots, packaged her in convenience, and sold the shell. But the true plant, the one the sages feared and revered, still waits. Not in dispensaries, but in discernment. That discernment isn't intellectual. It's vibrational. You feel it when the room goes still before the first inhale. When your hands pause not to roll but to recognize. When the smoke rises not into entertainment, but into invocation. That's the language she speaks. Not words, not visuals, but frequency. And those who once worked with her didn't rush the moment. They approached slowly, as one would approach fire, with respect, with presence, with the knowledge that what warms can also burn. In the Amazon, while cannabis wasn't central like ayahuasca or tobacco, the principle remained the same. The plant is the portal, but you are the offering. To misuse a plant was to invite imbalance. To light it without intention was to scatter energy into the wind. There were chants for entry, silence for communion, and elders to hold the field. No one smoked to take the edge off. The edge was the teacher. And until you were willing to face it, you weren't ready for the plant. But we've forgotten this. We light up with no container. We scroll while inhaling. We multitask through mystery. And the result isn't insight, it's interference. The signal gets garbled. The spirit of the plant becomes background noise to our overstimulated nervous systems. And then we wonder why it doesn't feel sacred anymore. But she hasn't changed. We have. The rituals that once aligned us with her frequency have been replaced by habits that disconnect us from our own. We removed the prayer and kept the product. We silenced the circle and kept the smoke. And we wonder why the plant no longer leads us to truth. But the ancient ones knew. They left us clues, in songs, in symbols, in silence. That to walk with this plant was to walk with yourself. Not your persona, not your narrative, your essence. And if you weren't prepared to meet that essence, the plant would not protect you from it. Because she isn't a shield. She's a revealer. She opens the door, but she doesn't walk you through. She waits to see if you've come for a feeling or a facing, for euphoria or initiation. And the difference is everything. Because only one will change you. Only one will bring you home. And home, in this sense, is not a place, it's a frequency of remembering. A state of no separation, no pretending, no performance. The mystics weren't chasing highs. They were chasing wholeness. They didn't seek sensation. They sought return. And cannabis was never the destination. She was the gatekeeper. You didn't just light up. You entered. A space. A current. Contract. Because the plant listens. She listens to your intention before she touches your lungs. She listens to your nervous system. Is it grounded or desperate? She listens to your silence. Is it devotional or distracted? And based on what she hears, she opens. Or she echoes. Or she mirrors. This is why those traditions feared her. Because she works too well. Because she opens what you're not ready to hold. Because she remembers when you've forgotten. Because she reflects when you're trying to hide. And there's no hiding in her field. No filters. No faking. No clever words to dress up avoidance. You're either aligned or you're not. And she'll show you. The ones who walked with her properly didn't just prepare their bodies. They prepared their lives. Their relationships. Their attention. They knew. This isn't about smoking the plant. This is about becoming a vessel that the plant can trust. Because if your field is noisy, she will amplify that noise. If your heart is cluttered, she will stir it. If your energy is fractured, she will reveal every splinter. That's not punishment. That's precision. And that's what the mystics honored. Not the effects. The mirror. Not the visions. The truths they couldn't unsee. And they didn't go alone. They went in circles. With guides. With rhythm. With space. Because they knew. The plant opens the veil, but only the circle can hold what comes through it. That's what we've lost. Not the potency. The preparation. Not the spirit. The structure. Not the access. The anchor. And until we reclaim that, the plant won't become less sacred. We will just forget how to see her that way. But the sacred doesn't disappear just because you stop noticing it. It waits. Quietly. Beneath the rituals we've reduced to habits. Beneath the prayers we've traded for playlists. Beneath the breath we rush through to chase a feeling. The plant is still sacred. She's still listening. But the question is, are we? We forgot that the ceremony wasn't for the gods. It was for you. To steady your hands before they held the flame. To quiet your thoughts before the veil lifted. To remind your body that this moment was different. Not casual, not routine, but ritual. Because how you enter determines what enters you. The ancient ones knew this. That the smoke wasn't just air transformed, it was intention made visible. That every inhale was a pact. And every exhale was an offering. They didn't ask the plant to save them. They prepared to meet her. And now we rush. We take. We light up in traffic, in stress, in disconnection, hoping the plant will fix what our lifestyle has broken. But she won't. She can't. She doesn't heal imbalance. She reveals it. And if you don't meet that revelation with reverence, she becomes distortion. That's why the modern experience often feels chaotic. Not because the plant is flawed, but because the space around her is fragmented. We've stripped the circle and kept the smoke. We've silenced the drumming and kept the buzz. We've deleted the descent and kept the dopamine. And the plant? She doesn't resist. She reflects. Every time. So if you want to remember how to walk with her, don't start by lighting up. Start by listening. Clear the space. Still the mind. Speak the intention aloud. Not to be heard, but to resonate. And then sit. Wait. Let the plant come to you. And when she does, don't chase the vision. Chase the truth. Because in that stillness, the kind you once ran from, she will show you what the mystics saw. Not the future. Not the fantasy. But the face beneath your masks. And that is where the real journey begins. We didn't lose the sacred overnight. It faded, quietly, beneath the surface of convenience. One click, one scroll, one smoke session at a time. Not because we rejected it, but because we forgot what it felt like to pause. We turned the plant into a product. Stripped her of context. Wrapped her in branding, sold her as relief. And in doing so, we turned what was once a threshold into a pastime. The doorway into soul became a lounge. The ceremony became a marketing strategy. The ritual disappeared. And without ritual, cannabis lost its compass. What was once a descent into presence is now a background haze to distraction. We light up in parking lots. We microdose between texts. We chase stimulation on screens while the smoke curls around our fatigue. And the plant, once a mirror of the divine, now reflects back only our disconnection. Because cannabis doesn't change. She adapts to the frame you offer. If you offer chaos, she reveals it. If you offer reverence, she responds with depth. But when there's no preparation, no silence, no stillness, no holding, all that remains is sensation. And sensation without containment becomes indulgence. This is the spiral. This is why so many keep smoking and feel less grounded, less clear, less alive. The plant is the same, but the vessel is cluttered. The altar is gone, and the sacred, though still present, becomes muffled beneath the noise. It's not the plant that's lost her power. We've lost our way of holding her, because the ritual was never for her. It was for you, to cleanse, to reset, to remember, and without it you enter the temple with muddy feet. Not as a pilgrim but as a tourist. And you wonder why the view feels blurry. The ancient ones didn't need luxury to create ritual. They needed intention. Dirt floors became sacred ground. A circle of breath became a sanctuary. What made the moment holy wasn't the props. It was the presence. And that presence is what we must reclaim. Because without it, cannabis becomes another loop. Another high. Another way to avoid the very truth she came to reveal. And what is that truth? That you were never meant to consume the sacred. You were meant to become it. But becoming it requires something we rarely offer anymore. Space. Not physical space, inner space. Cleared field. A silent room within. And ritual, in its truest form, was never about performance. It was about creating that space. A vibrational readiness that told the plant, I'm here. Not for escape. Not for comfort. But for truth. Without that readiness, the plant becomes diluted. Her messages blur. Her insights become fragments, scattered and forgotten the moment the high fades. And what's left isn't wisdom. It's waste. A trail of unrealized potential. Sacred smoke turned to static. This is how the spectacle began. Not with malice, but with amnesia. We forgot the weight of our breath, the meaning of silence, the power of conscious entry. And into that forgetting, consumerism poured its glitter. Suddenly cannabis had influencers, mood boards, packaging that promised enlightenment in pastel tones. No one warned that the plant still remembered what she was. She remembers the silence that once surrounded her. She remembers the circles that once welcomed her. She remembers the tears that once cleansed the field before she entered. And now she watches, from dispensary shelves and Instagram feeds, as we smoke her in haste, asking her to do the work we refuse to do ourselves. But she's patient, not passive patient. She knows illusion can't hold forever, that sooner or later the discomfort will rise again, that beneath the curated calm, the soul still calls. And when that call becomes louder than the noise, she'll be waiting, because the ritual was never about smoke. It was about alignment, not incense but intention, not tradition but truth. And truth doesn't need props. It needs presence. You can create ritual anywhere, alone, in silence, without script. All it asks is that you meet the moment fully, that you put the phone away, that you sit with yourself before you inhale, that you ask and wait for the answer to come from within. Because the Realest ceremony begins before the plant is even touched. It begins the moment you choose to meet her, not with expectation, but with respect. And when that respect returns, so does the sacred. Not because she changed, but because you did. And once you've changed, even subtly, the plant responds. Not with fireworks, not with visions, but with resonance. A new kind of stillness, a deeper kind of breath, a silence that doesn't feel empty but anchored. You realize then that cannabis was never about the intensity. It was about the integrity of your inner world. This is why ancient traditions held the preparation in such high regard. Because the real journey doesn't begin with the first inhale. It begins with the decision to approach the plant as an equal, not a tool, not a substance, but a being. one that sees through you, one that listens to your energy before you speak a word. The Rasta called this reasoning, not a smoke session, but a ceremony of clarity. The herb was passed with purpose. Words were chosen carefully. Silence was honored like scripture. The circle wasn't just a space, it was a sanctum. And within it, the plant wasn't the center. Truth was. Contrast that with now. One hand holds the joint, the other scrolls. Music blares. Messages blink. The mind scatters. And the plant becomes fog instead of fire. Not because she failed, but because there was no container to hold her. We've mistaken consumption for communion. We've traded depth for dopamine. We've forgotten that sacredness doesn't ask to be felt. It asks to be held. And what we don't hold with care, we lose to casualness. Until even the holy becomes just another backdrop to our boredom. But the sacred remembers. The plant remembers. And so does your soul. Even if the world tells you otherwise. Even if ritual feels inconvenient, outdated, or strange. Even if your mind resists the stillness. Something inside you knows this is not just smoke. This is a spirit. And spirits are not consumed. They are invited. With reverence. With readiness. With the kind of listening that doesn't begin when the music fades, but when your distractions do. And in that listening, something ancient awakens. Something that doesn't need words. Only presence. The body is more than flesh. More than chemistry. It's an ecosystem of energy, layered, sensitive, ancient in design. And cannabis doesn't just enter the lungs. It moves through the field. Through the architecture of breath, memory, emotion, and ether. You may not see it, but you've felt it. That shift moments after the inhale when time thickens. When space feels closer, thoughts louder, skin more aware. That's not just neurochemistry. That's the subtle body awakening. Or, if unprepared, being overwhelmed. In traditions that mapped these inner landscapes, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, the Hermetic schools, the energetic body was central. Not a metaphor, a reality, a matrix of channels, centers, and flows. And every plant, every substance interacted with it differently. Some grounded, some lifted, some dissolved. Cannabis? She amplifies. Whatever is latent becomes loud. Whatever is blocked becomes felt. Whatever is unresolved rises. Not because she's unkind, because she's clear. She doesn't numb. She illuminates. But only if the field is ready. And here's where most go wrong. They invite the plant into a house full of noise. Cluttered thoughts. Unexpressed grief. Scattered attention. No preparation. No stillness. No cleansing. Just smoke layered on top of static. And the result? Not clarity. Chaos. The body feels foggy. The thoughts spiral, the emotions churn. People call it anxiety. But it's not anxiety. It's feedback. The system is responding to an energetic surge. The plant has entered. And the space was not clean. In Reiki, cannabis is sometimes called a field disruptor. Not because it's bad, but because it moves fast. If the practitioner isn't grounded, sessions become unstable. Visions increase, but discernment decreases. The signal is loud, but scrambled. And instead of insight, you get interference. The same is true in Kundalini work. Cannabis can awaken energy prematurely. You feel electric, euphoric, connected, until you don't, until you crash, until you realize that what opened wasn't integrated. That your system lit up, but your vessel couldn't hold it. Because the subtle body isn't just a channel for experience. It's a container. And without integrity in that container, even sacred energy becomes fragmentation. That fragmentation is subtle at first. A little more tired the next day. A little less focused. A little more reactive in conversation. You brush it off. Maybe you didn't sleep well, maybe it's stress. But what's actually happening is deeper. Your field has been disturbed, not in a dramatic way, but like a finely tuned instrument slightly out of key. Cannabis, when used without awareness, doesn't just alter perception. It stirs the energetic sediment, the unprocessed, the suppressed, the unresolved. Think of it like pouring water into a glass layered with dust at the bottom. First, it looks clear. Then the swirl begins. Suddenly, the water's cloudy. It's not the water's fault. It's the motion that revealed what was always sitting there. This is why the ancients didn't use the plant alone. It was always embedded in a system: breathwork, fasting, mantra, movement. These weren't accessories. They were cleansing practices, ways to stabilize the field before the plant entered, so that what rose could be seen, held, integrated. Today we ignore the field completely. We focus on strains, on terpenes, on THC percentages. We forget that it's not just the chemistry that matters. It's the coherence of your inner space. You can't enter a temple built on restlessness and expect revelation. You'll only amplify confusion. And the more often you do it, the more that confusion starts to feel normal. Until one day you don't know if the plant is opening you or emptying you. And that's the hidden danger. Not addiction in the conventional sense, but erosion. A slow leaking of energy. A dulling of clarity. A dissociation dressed up as peace. You begin to call the fog calm. You begin to accept the static as signal. You light up not because you're ready, but because you don't know how to be with yourself without it. But the plant was never meant to replace your center. She was meant to reflect it. She was meant to work with a body already in rhythm, a breath already deep, a mind already still. And if those aren't present, she doesn't withhold her power. She amplifies your imbalance. Not to harm, but to reveal. Not to punish, but to instruct. The question is, are you willing to listen to that instruction? Are you willing to clean your temple before inviting her in? Are you willing to pause long enough to ask, is my field clear or just craving? Because when you bring a prepared vessel to the plant, something shifts. The noise doesn't increase. It dissolves. The visions don't confuse. They clarify. The energy doesn't scatter. It flows. And the plant? She doesn't dominate. She dances. She moves with you, through you, not as a force overtaking, but as a frequency aligning. This is the true ecology. Not chemical, energetic. Not about what you take in, but what your system can hold, filter, and embody. Because the plant can't give you what you don't have space to receive. And she won't hold for you what you refuse to clean. She will meet you where you are. The rest is up to you. Anxiety, paranoia, that sudden wave of self-consciousness. You've felt it. Maybe not every time, but often enough to wonder why. You were calm a moment ago. The world made sense. Then the smoke hit your lungs, and suddenly, the silence wasn't soothing anymore. It was piercing. Every thought felt too loud. Every sensation too raw. It's easy to blame the plant, the strain, the setting. But what if that rush of discomfort isn't a side effect? What if it's a reveal? Because cannabis doesn't generate your fear. She unmasks it. Like a mirror turned inward, she shows you the parts of your psyche you've kept locked away. The questions you don't want to ask. The truths you're not ready to admit. The pain you've normalized, buried under routines and jokes and productivity. This is the shadow. Not evil, not demonic, just unseen. The unprocessed grief. The swallowed anger. The unresolved trauma. The false stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you deserve, why you're stuck. Most people don't know they carry these things until the plant lifts the veil. And then they panic. Because truth, when uninvited, feels like threat. Not because it's wrong, but because it dismantles the self that's been curated for survival. That self, the one you call you, is not fixed. It's a construct, a network of defenses, habits, and beliefs designed to keep you safe. And cannabis doesn't ask permission. She walks past the guards. She enters the core. She knocks gently or not so gently and says, look. That moment, when the anxiety rises, when the breath shortens, when the mind scrambles, that's not a malfunction. That's the ego losing control. And for those not prepared, it feels like death. But it's not death. It's exposure. And exposure is the first step to liberation, if you're willing to stay with it. But most people run. They distract. They numb. They light up again, trying to override the signal. Or they swear off the plant entirely, calling it toxic. But the toxicity wasn't the plant. It was what she revealed. Carl Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, the meeting of the parts of the self we've rejected. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Cannabis makes the unconscious louder, not to shame you, to free you, because what's seen can be healed. What's named can be integrated. What's faced can finally shift. The question is not, why did I feel anxious? The question is, what truth did that anxiety point toward? And, am I ready to meet it without numbing, without running, without turning the mirror away? Because the plant is not punishing you. She's revealing you, and that revelation is the beginning of becoming whole. And becoming whole is not about feeling better, it's about facing deeper. Wholeness doesn't come from comfort, it comes from contact, with what you've exiled, with what you've judged, with the ache that lives just beneath the surface smile. Cannabis, when she amplifies your shadow, is not betraying you. She's honoring you. She's showing you that your soul trusts you enough to bring the truth forward, that your nervous system is ready, even if your mind resists, to hold what you've long avoided. But you must learn to stay, to breathe, to witness without rushing into reaction. Because what we call a bad trip is often just a breakthrough with no guide. A sacred emergence misunderstood as crisis. If only we had the language to hold it. If only we had the circle to witness it. If only we had the courage to listen instead of fix. You feel watched? Good. That's your awareness sharpening. You feel vulnerable? Good. That's your armor loosening. You feel like you're dissolving? That's not a problem. That's the process. The ego melts not with grace, but with fire. And that fire shows you where you're still clinging, where you've mistaken performance for personality, where you've mistaken identity for self. And yes, it's terrifying, but terror is a threshold. And cannabis, if used with sacred awareness, will walk you to that edge. She won't push, but she'll wait, to see if you'll step forward, to see if you'll say yes to seeing yourself not as you appear, but as you are. Messy, beautiful, unfinished, free. Because once you see the shadow, truly see it without flinching, it loses its grip. It doesn't vanish, but it integrates. It becomes part of your wholeness, not your fear. And suddenly, the plant doesn't trigger anxiety anymore. She triggers honesty, not panic presence. And you realize the fear wasn't the enemy. The enemy was the distance you placed between yourself and what was real. Now, there is no distance. There is only you meeting yourself in the mirror of smoke and bowing. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. It's easy to mistake the high for healing, to feel the warmth rise in your chest, the soft blur around your thoughts, the strange sense that the world is finally making sense, and call it transcendence, to call it peace, to call it awakening. But sensation isn't transformation. And cannabis, when approached without discernment, becomes seduction. Because the plant can mimic illumination. She can flood you with insight, with pattern recognition, with synchronicity that feels like divine alignment. Music speaks louder. Thoughts seem wiser. You write pages of what feels like revelation. You call friends and share your clarity. For a moment, it's all glowing. But ask yourself, did it change you? Not what you felt, not what you saw, but what you carried back. Because cannabis can show you heaven without giving you a map. And you might visit it 100 times, convinced that each journey is progress, when in truth you're orbiting the same illusion. That to feel something deeply is the same as becoming it. But becoming takes practice. Becoming takes silence. Becoming takes loss of identity, of fantasy, of the safety that comes from merely observing rather than integrating. This is what esoteric traditions warned about, the false light, the brilliance that comes not from the soul, but from the intellect inflated by sensation. Kabbalists called it had, a glow that glimmers like gold, but crumbles under pressure, a state where insight becomes a costume, where spiritual language replaces spiritual depth. Cannabis, for all her honesty, can be a tool for this inflation if you meet her for the wrong reasons. If you chase the feeling of clarity rather than its practice. If you collect visions but never apply them. if you speak of love but continue to avoid conflict, if you write about healing but still refuse to be held accountable, the plant will not stop you. She's not punitive. She's permissive. She will let you build entire temples from sensation. And she will watch as they collapse when real life arrives. The moment the relationship fractures, the silence gets too loud, the job drains your spirit and the ritual stops working. And that's when the truth hits. You didn't integrate. You just floated. You didn't walk the path. You lit incense near it. You didn't ground the light. You wore it. And that light, once worn too long without embodiment, becomes blinding. You begin to mistake your sensitivity for superiority, your insight for wisdom, your experience for evolution. But evolution is not what you feel during the high. It's what remains when it's gone. What remains, that's the real teacher. Can you still speak gently when your nerves are frayed? Can you still breathe deeply when no bliss is present? Can you hold someone else's pain without needing to fix or flee? These are the fruits of true awakening, and they cannot be faked. They are grown in silence, in stillness, in the long hours after the high, when no one is watching, when nothing feels profound, when the sacred is stripped of sparkle and left bare. Cannabis can open the door, yes, but walking through it, that's not her task. That's yours. And if you stay at the threshold, basking in the light, mistaking the opening for arrival, you never actually enter. You circle. You repeat. You get high and higher and still, your life doesn't change. You might start to sound spiritual. You might even look awakened, but your patterns persist. Your shadow creeps in through the back door. And slowly, the plant stops being a portal and starts being a prop. Another tool in the theater of progress. Another veil over the unhealed wound. This is what the mystics warned us about. Osho said, substances open doors that only silence should open. He wasn't against the experience. He was pointing to its instability. Because if you rely on the high to feel clear, you haven't integrated the light. You've outsourced it. And that is the beginning of spiritual dependency, not on a drug, but on a sensation. And dependency, even wrapped in sacred words, is still avoidance. You stop asking, what is this teaching me? And instead ask, how can I get back there again? That's the shift from revelation to repetition, from embodiment to performance, from presence to pattern. But cannabis, in her deepest truth, won't follow you there forever. If you keep using her to simulate awakening, she will begin to show you the very emptiness you're avoiding. The high will flatten, the visions will blur, the light will feel hollow, and that hollow space is not failure. It's the real invitation, because when the glow fades, and nothing feels sacred, and the journal stays blank, and the music sounds distant, that's when the real work begins. Not to light up again, but to ask, what did I forget to carry with me? That's where cannabis becomes holy again. Not in what she shows you, but in what she asks of you. She asks not for devotion, not for praise, not for you to light another stick of incense or recite the names of the mystics. She asks for embodiment, for the moment you choose presence over escape, for the breath you take before reacting, for the courage to hold what's difficult without looking away. Because the highest state she can show you is not the one that feels ecstatic. It's the one that translates into how you live, into the small, unnoticed acts, into how you speak to your mother, how you respond when your plans fall apart, how you sit with boredom without numbing it. This is where the plant's real power begins, when it stops being about the peak experience and starts being about the afterglow. The residue of truth that lingers when the smoke clears. The imprint of insight that reshapes your rhythm. And if nothing in your life is shifting, if your relationships remain shallow, if your patterns persist, if your love stays conditional, then it wasn't awakening. It was stimulation. Sacred stimulation, perhaps, but still a wave without an anchor. The mystics didn't worship the visions. They watched what the visions demanded. Because the soul doesn't care what you've seen. It cares what you do with what you've seen. The dream is only sacred if it roots into reality. If it reorients your choices. If it makes your silence more honest, your touch more present, your words more precise. And so the plant, patient and precise, waits to see. Will you let the insight shape your next argument? Will you let the clarity soften your judgments? Will you let the light clean out your contradictions? Because if not, the high becomes hollow, a performance of depth, a costume made of insight worn by an ego that never actually surrendered. This is the subtle danger. Not intoxication, but imitation. Not dependency, but disembodiment. The belief that feeling something profound is the transformation, rather than the beginning of it. But cannabis, in her essence, isn't interested in helping you feel deep. She's interested in whether you can live deep, whether the quiet she brings becomes your own, whether the mirror she holds becomes your teacher, even when she's gone. And if it doesn't, if you need her every time to return to yourself, then it's not spirituality. It's sedation in sacred clothing. And she'll let you stay there if you insist. But at some point, she'll also whisper, "You're not meant to orbit meaning. You're meant to become it." Set the plant down. Walk. And walking doesn't mean renouncing her. It means remembering what she revealed and choosing to live it without leaning on her voice. It means letting the message outlive the messenger. Letting the mirror become memory. Letting your own stillness rise in the space where the smoke used to be. Because cannabis, at her core, isn't meant to hold your hand forever. She is the spark, not the flame. The gate, not the guide. The moment of clarity before the discipline begins. And if you stay too long in her embrace, you risk turning wisdom into a loop, always remembering, never becoming. So how do you know when it's time to stop? Not forever. Not in denial. Just long enough to see what you've integrated. The test isn't how good the high feels. It's how grounded you are without it. Can you still access that clarity when life disappoints you? Can you still find silence when no plant guides you there? That's when the shift becomes visible. When your nervous system no longer craves the ritual to find rest. When your spirit no longer waits for smoke to remember it's sacred. When the breath alone becomes enough. When truth arises without cue. And if you've carried the teachings with integrity, the plant will smile. Not literally, but subtly. The next time you return, the experience will be cleaner, quieter, not more euphoric, but more true. She will recognize the work you've done without her. She will meet you in respect, not dependence. Because that's what she always wanted, not to be your crutch, but your mirror. Not to be the light, but the one who reminded you where to find it. And once you've found it, truly found it, you don't need to keep proving it to yourself. You simply live. In the ordinary. In the mundane. In the repetition of your days. Where silence speaks loudest and actions echo deepest. That's where the real ceremony unfolds. Not in visions, but in consistency. Not in feeling sacred, but in moving sacredly through unsacred spaces. And if you can carry that, if you can embody that, then you've passed the plant's deepest test. You've stopped chasing awakening. You've started being awake. And no smoke is needed for that. Because what is truly sacred leaves a residue, not of stimulation, but of stillness. A subtle shift in your gravity. A reordering of your breath. A deeper intimacy with the now. And the plant, when met with presence, imprints this within you. Not as dependency, but as reminder. The question is, what do you do with the reminder? Do you archive it in memory, like a beautiful dream you recount at dinner but never live? Or do you build around it, a life that reflects what was glimpsed, a rhythm that matches the silence you touched? Because that silence, that real silence, it's not emptiness. It's presence without pretense. It's you without the stories. And the more you return to that presence on your own, without smoke, without ritual, without the alchemy of plant chemistry, the more you realize that cannabis was never the destination. She was the rehearsal, the whisper, the soft knock on the door of your attention. And now that you've heard it, really heard it, you have a choice, to keep knocking or to enter, to keep invoking the experience or to embody it. Because the high is not the proof. The integration is. And integration means this, that what you saw in the light survives the dark. That what you felt in ecstasy guides you through grief. That what was revealed while high becomes how you respond while low. That's the spiral of awakening, not upward, but inward. Not infinite intensity, but deepening coherence. A life that gets quieter, not because there is less to say, but because truth needs fewer words. And in that quiet, the sacred returns. Not as smoke, not as sound, but as you, unfolding, walking, witnessing, becoming. Becoming isn't an event. It's not a switch you flip in the middle of a ceremony or a revelation that lands with fireworks. It's slower, quieter, like the way dawn doesn't break. It spills, and you only notice the light after the shadows have softened. That's the kind of shift the plant was always pointing toward. Not the ecstatic, but the embodied. Not the lifted, but the anchored. A kind of spirituality that's not about how much you feel, but how deeply you care. How clearly you see. How consistently you show up. You know it's real when it no longer needs the plant to be remembered. You know it's real when, instead of seeking, you begin serving. Not as a guru, not as a guide, but simply as one who listens. One who's learned to make space inside themselves for something larger than performance. For stillness that doesn't ask for a stage. For truth that doesn't need to be declared. And the plant, old as myth, watches all of this unfold. She doesn't judge. She doesn't interfere. She continues to wait, like the spirit she's always been, offering only what you're ready to receive, and only as long as you need her to reflect. Because the truth is, her deepest gift was never the high. It was the mirror, and the mirror was never meant to be stared into forever. It was meant to be understood and then set down, so you could look up, so you could step forward, so you could begin to see the sacred not just in the altered state, but in the unchanged world. In the way the light lands on a sidewalk, in the breath before you speak, in the way you hold someone's gaze and mean it. This is where the real work begins. Not in the smoke, but in the silence that follows. In the walking, in the witnessing, in the weaving of spirit into form. Because you weren't meant to live in the ritual. You were meant to live the ritual out in how you walk, speak, pause, and hold. That's how the plant becomes legacy. Not a substance. A spirit that shaped you. Not a feeling. A frequency you now carry. Not an escape, but a doorway you had the courage to enter and the discipline to leave. So you could bring back something real. Something sacred. Something true. Yourself. There's a doorway cannabis rarely gets credit for, the realm of dreams. Not just the night dreams that flicker behind closed eyes, but the deeper ones, the archetypal language of the unseen, where the subconscious and the spirit speak without words. Many longtime users report a strange silence in sleep. The dreaming stops, or thins, or vanishes. First, it seems like rest, but underneath something's paused, not out of harm, but out of overflow. The plant, when taken often without space, doesn't suppress the dream world. She overwhelms it, because dreams, like all sacred things, need space to unfold. Cannabis amplifies the internal signal, but dreams require the subtle. Too much input, too much amplification, and the dream world recedes. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. It waits until you return to stillness. But when the balance is right, when the plant is approached with intention, and not consumption, something else happens. Dreams bloom again, and this time they speak. With symbols, with echoes, with impossible clarity, and sometimes with memory not yours, but the soul's. As if cannabis unseals a forgotten script in the language of the deep. In many lineages, dreams were oracles, tools of medicine, portals to instruction, and cannabis was used to enter those spaces more consciously. But only after fasting, only after prayer, only when the dreamer was ready to be taught, not entertained. Because the dream world is not a theme park. It's a temple, and cannabis doesn't decorate that temple. She magnifies what you bring into it. If you carry chaos, the dreams will speak in riddles. If you carry clarity, they'll come as guidance. And if you carry reverence, true embodied reverence, they might come as memory. Not imagination, but soul memory of who you were before the forgetting, and who you're still becoming now. Cannabis is not alone. She walks among a lineage, ayahuasca, peyote, psilocybin, iboga, each with their own voice, their own gate, their own temperament. But while others often break the ego with fire, cannabis tends to whisper. And it's that subtlety that makes her both accessible and misunderstood. Ayahuasca brings purge, vision, dissolution. She demands surrender through intensity. Peyote steadies, earths, opens the heart through endurance, not euphoria. Mushrooms unravel the construct, language, self, time, until only essence remains. And cannabis? She amplifies what is. Without ceremony, she becomes soft chaos. With it, she becomes tuning fork. She doesn't break. She reveals the cracks already present. She doesn't lead to visions unless you're already prepared to see. She doesn't cleanse unless you've already begun. That's her subtle danger. Her low threshold of entry gives the illusion that no preparation is needed. That because she feels gentle, the consequences are light. But subtle doesn't mean soft. It means surgical. And if you're not listening, if you're not grounded, she cuts sideways, slowly, invisibly, across the spirit. The contrast matters. Ayahuasca often comes with elders, songs, dieta, space. Cannabis? A couch, a screen, a snack. And that's the problem, not her essence, but the frame we place her in. No other plant has been so sacred and yet so trivialized. So holy and yet so commercial. But she hasn't changed. She's still the same entity honored by mystics and healers. It's us who changed. We stripped the ritual and kept the result. And now we don't understand why she feels inconsistent. Why sometimes she opens the heart, and sometimes she shuts us down. But the plant isn't random. She reflects the container. And when we remember that, when we treat her with the same reverence we reserve for the more dramatic medicines, something ancient reawakens. A softness that speaks truth. A clarity that doesn't shout. A spirit that knows you and waits. Cannabis is not an object. She's not a substance in the way the world defines it. Not just chemical, not just leaf, not just smoke. She's a being. Not metaphorically, literally. Presence. A consciousness with her own rhythm, her own memory, her own will. Shamans don't talk about plants in categories. They speak of spirits. Icaros sung to ayahuasca, prayers whispered to tobacco, names given to mushroom beings. Each plant is not just what it does, it's who it is. And cannabis, like the others, knows when she's being respected. And when she's not. She is ancient, wild. She doesn't care about your coolness or your calm. She cares about alignment. She responds not to the words you say, but to the state you embody. You can call her sacred, but if you scroll through dopamine loops while she's in your lungs, she knows the truth. She enters softly, but precisely. And when she arrives, she begins to read you. Not in judgment, in resonance. She feels your energy field. She feels your emotional honesty. She feels whether your intention is sincere or decorative. And from there, she chooses how to appear. To the humble, she becomes stillness. To the scattered, she becomes spiral. To the reverent, she becomes mirror. To the performative, she becomes fog. She is not random. She is responsive. And that responsiveness is why ancient lineages guarded her carefully. Not out of fear, out of respect. Because to misuse a spirit is to distort the message. And to distort the message is to suffer confusion disguised as insight. That's what happens in the absence of relationship. We consume and she fades. Not because she's gone, but because she won't speak where there's no listening. And yet, if you approach her as a being, if you light the bowl like a candle, if you speak aloud like to an old friend, if you pause before inhaling and say, "Show me only what I'm ready to hold," she responds. Not always with comfort, but always with clarity. And in that clarity, something shifts. Not the plant. You. The most overlooked part of the journey is the before. The silence before the breath. The intention before the flame. The cleansing before the communion. Preparation isn't superstition, it's safety. It's not ritual for the sake of tradition. It's ritual as alignment. Because cannabis doesn't purify you. She responds to your purity. If your mind is tangled, she amplifies the knot. If your emotions are swirling, she stirs the storm. If your body is restless, she rattles it louder. This is why, in sacred cultures, preparation was everything. Fasting, silence, stillness, chanting, bathing. Not because these acts pleased the plant, but because they tuned the field, the subtle body, the emotional terrain, the breath rhythms. They cleared the vessel so that what came through would land clearly, not through distortion. Most of what we call bad highs are simply unprepared ones. No grounding, no centering, no intention, just a casual inhale into a chaotic system, and then surprise when the chaos grows louder. But if you pause, just pause, something shifts. You light the smoke not as escape, but as entry. You sit with your spine tall, your breath slow, your attention open. You ask the plant, what do you need to show me? And you wait. Not because something dramatic will happen, but because you're showing the field, your field, that this moment matters. That this is not routine. That you're willing to enter clean, not to impress the plant, but to respect the truth she reflects. And when that preparation is real, when your body is clear, your mind soft, your heart open, she speaks differently. The noise dissolves. The mirror sharpens. The message lands not as vision, but as vibration. Not as hallucination, but as homecoming. And you realize, the ritual wasn't for her. It was always for you. To remember how to listen. To remember how to receive. And to become the kind of vessel where insight doesn't just pass through, it roots. Once, the plant was never smoked alone. Not in the sacred lineages. Not in the ancient circles. There was always a container. A space held by breath, by rhythm, by prayer, by people. A circle not just of bodies but of intention. You didn't just light up. You entered. The Rastafari called it reasoning. A gathering where cannabis wasn't an escape, but a portal into truth-telling, conflict resolution, and spiritual alignment. The herb passed clockwise. Words rose like smoke. Everyone listened. No one performed. Silence held weight. And in that space you weren't getting high. You were getting clear. In West African and Afro-Brazilian cosmologies, even when cannabis wasn't central, the principle held. Every plant, every ritual, every offering required containment. A sacred circle. A designated rhythm. A prayer not just to open but to hold. Because when a plant enters without containment, her power spills. It moves into the ungrounded. It leaks into the unresolved. And now, most of us smoke alone. Headphones in. Phone lit. Disconnected. Floating. And when the visions come, there's no one to witness them. When the shadow rises, no one to hold you. When the insight lands, no one to reflect it. And so it drifts. Dissolves. The moment passes, powerful but unanchored. We mistake stimulation for depth. We call intensity integration. But integration needs others. The real transformation happens not in the trip, but in the return, in the sharing, in the reflection, in being told, yes, I see that in you too, or no, that's your illusion speaking. Because alone everything feels true, but not everything is. Without the circle, we spiral. Without the mirror, we believe our masks. But in a sacred circle, even a small one, insight meets resistance. Egos dissolve not because they're bad, but because they're seen. And that's what grounds the experience. Not the plant, the people, the presence, the witness. This is what we've lost. And it's time we remembered. You don't need a jungle. You need reverence. You don't need a temple. You need each other. A friend. A flame. Clear intention. Phones off. Eyes open. Listening not to reply but to resonate. That's the real high. That's where cannabis sings. The sacred doesn't need to be invented. It needs to be remembered. It was never gone. Just covered. Drowned in noise. Buried beneath convenience. Forgotten in the speed of wanting to feel something now. But it waits, quiet, alive, unchanged, beneath every inhale. You don't need a ritual from another culture to remember the sacred. You need to treat the moment as sacred. That's all. Intention, tension, stillness. Not performance but presence. Not doctrine but devotion. The kind of devotion that doesn't try to look holy. It feels whole. Because every high is an invitation to practice how you'll live when it fades. The plant gives you access, but only you can build the bridge. And that bridge is made from small, quiet choices. Lighting in silence. Breathing deeply. Asking, what do I need to see today? Reflecting instead of escaping. Pausing instead of scrolling. Journaling what you feel. Sitting with what rises. And most of all, integrating. Letting the insight become action. Letting the vision become rhythm. Letting the presence carry into how you eat, speak, touch, walk, love. Because what's the point of seeing something sacred if you don't embody it? What good is clarity if it doesn't make you more kind? What's the use of feeling cosmic if you still avoid the hard conversation? This is where the path turns real. When you stop chasing the light and start becoming it. When you stop needing the plant to remind you who you are, because you remember, not as a concept, as a felt truth, a resonance in the bones, a stillness in the breath, a steadiness in the gaze. And when that becomes natural, when you return to that space without effort, without smoke, without needing anything outside yourself, then you know. The sacred is no longer something you visit, it's something you are. There comes a point, if you've walked the path with honesty, when the plant offers you silence. Not emptiness, completion. You light it, you breathe, you wait, but nothing moves. No insight, no unraveling, no spiral, just stillness. Just you. And if you've truly listened, you'll recognize that moment for what it is. The invitation to stop. Not as rejection, as graduation. The plant has nothing more to say. Not because she's withholding, but because you've heard what you came to hear. The rest must be lived now, not inhaled. Not remembered in ritual. Embodied in repetition. And this is the part most avoid. The leaving. Because the plant has become a friend, a teacher, a mirror, a rhythm. And setting it down feels like losing something. Like silence where there used to be ceremony. Like waking from a dream you didn't want to end. But this silence is sacred too. It's the space where integration begins. It's where you stop chasing frequency and start emitting it. Not because you feel high, but because you live high. In your speech, in your pace, in your forgiveness. In your ability to sit with discomfort without needing a crutch. And maybe one day you'll return. But not because you're lost. Because you're listening. And the plant, ever patient, will meet you exactly where you are, with no judgment, no echo of the past, just the clear mirror of your present. And if the mirror is clear enough, maybe you won't need to look. Because you'll already know. You'll already be. And the teacher will nod, quietly, and step back. Because you've remembered, the plant was never the light. You were. What begins as a spark must become a flame. Not in the sky, but in the everyday. Because if cannabis showed you clarity, it's now your task to carry it. Through routine, through repetition, through the slow, unglamorous rhythm of presence. Integration isn't mystical. It's practical. It's brushing your teeth with awareness. It's choosing patience instead of reaction. Is pausing before you speak, not because you're high, but because you've trained yourself to listen. That's the alchemy, not what happens in ceremony, what happens after. The transformed life is not loud. It doesn't need to declare itself. It simply moves differently. People feel it in your gaze, your tone, your timing. They don't ask what you've taken. They wonder where your peace comes from. And you know, it came from the fire of seeing yourself. It came from the mirror that didn't flatter, but revealed. And now it comes from you, from your breath, your choices, your way of walking through the world like it's already sacred. Because it is. The point was never to stay in the altered state. The point was to let the altered state alter you. So that even in traffic, even in heartbreak, even in boredom, your center remains. Your clarity endures. Your heart stays open. And this is when cannabis truly fulfills her role. Not as something you return to, but as something that helped return you. To yourself. To your rhythm. To your truth. And now your life becomes the vessel. Your presence becomes the prayer. And your quiet becomes the loudest teaching you'll ever offer. Now the mirror no longer lives in the plant. It lives in you. Every interaction, every moment of discomfort, every pause before action. All of it is now reflection. Not of who you were, but of who you are becoming. And what cannabis once revealed through smoke, you now see through silence. The plant was never the source. It was the lens. And now you've integrated that lens. You carry it in your perception, in your honesty, in the way you meet the world without hiding. This is what the ancients meant when they said the plant was a teacher. Not a god to be worshipped, not a substance to be repeated, a frequency to align with and eventually surpass. Because you were never meant to depend on the teacher forever. You were meant to graduate. And now, every quiet moment holds the same potential, the same sacredness, the same invitation to breathe deeply, to listen completely, to act in alignment with what you've seen, not once but again and again, until the vision becomes your baseline. This is where the spiral completes. Not in euphoria, not in vision, but in practice. You walk through the world with fewer words, deeper presence, and a kind of gaze that doesn't seek attention. It offers witnessing. You're no longer trying to become anything. You're simply being what you remembered you already were. And the plant? She's there if you ever need her. But now the sacred lives in your silence. The medicine lives in your action. And the mirror lives in every step you take toward truth. Not for the high, not for the vision, but for the love, for the clarity, for the remembering that this was never about the plant. It was always about you. If something in this spoke to you, not just in thought, but in that quiet place beneath your chest, let us know. Leave a trace, a few words, a moment of presence. And if you feel called to keep walking this path, slowly, clearly, with intention, subscribe. Not for more content, for more remembering, because this isn't about the plant. It's about you, not about what you smoke, but about what you become.